first. Motion by Dr. Schab, second by Joe. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Go ahead, Michelle.
We'll now move on to the base board agenda. Item 2, approval of the agenda. Are there any adjustments or corrections? Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion and a second?
I'll motion.
Motion by Brandon Shepherd, second. By Nicole Tenacious. And all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Turn it back over to you.
See, within 2 minutes, Manley already screwed up and voted for you guys. So. Luckily, there's no penalty. That's the good thing. So let's go back to the District 1 and approval of the minutes. The November 14th minutes are on electronic pages 2 and 3. Do I have any corrections or additions for any board members? See none, can I get a motion and a second?
So moved.
Moved by Josh Anderson, second by Dave Berger. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Michelle?
We'll now move on to the approval of the minutes from October 18th on the base board. Again, the base board. Are there any adjustments or corrections? Hearing none, may I have a motion and a second?
I'll motion.
Motion by Brandon Shepherd. May I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Brent Harlan. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Item 4 on both of our agendas is public comments, but unless you've got some public comments to say from the Herald, I don't think we have any people to speak. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you. Let's move on to item 5, which is superintendent's recommendations for discussion. 5A is meeting norms on electronic page 4. Dr. Schab.
Be on time, be prepared, value and respect each other, exercise thoughtful deliberation and conversation, be professional at the board table and when visiting with the general public, speak up when the norms are not being followed, advocate on behalf of students, and keep the community in mind.
Thank you. Michelle?
We're now going to move on to the agenda 5B with the base board. I'd like to pass this on to Dr. Brenner to introduce Colonel Timothy Curry with the state of the base.
Thank you, Madam President. It's my privilege and pleasure to introduce Colonel Tim Curry, the Wing Commander for the Grand Forks Air Force Base. In a country that is sometimes divided over discourse and conversation, I have witnessed Colonel Curry unite people in the most professional and humanitarian way as he leads the Grand Forks Air Force Base. And I'll tell you what kind of a collaborator he is. He's the first colonel who has shared his cell phone with me, his cell phone number. So he's all about conversation and collaboration as we make some joint decisions together as it relates to Twining School, as it relates to weather. And again, without further ado, please welcome Colonel Tim Curry.
They can adjust that, right? Okay, awesome. Well, I'm excited to be back here again. Colonel Tim Curry, I think I've met most of you and seen most of you last year or throughout the course of the last 3+ years that we've been here in Grand Forks with my family. This will be a little bit similar to last year in that I've brought some pictures and vignettes of airmen and their families just to have a discussion about things we've seen, great opportunities and some of the challenges we've had over the course of the last year. But I'm actually going to start a little bit different than I did last year with kind of highlighting a little bit of our mission and vision overall, because I didn't do that, and I realized I missed an opportunity, and other commanders, I think, do that. Some of the things we share that you guys do, we get together a couple times a year. This is actually my command team. The last time we got together was in September. We'll get together again in April. But as you look at that team, think of Grand Forks, but also think about, well, you can see stars up there in that globe. We had a unit that was in California. We had commanders from Sicily. We also had commanders from Guam. And then in February, we'll have a unit that answers to me all the way from Georgia. So when you think about your impact from a education standpoint, it really is global. Those three values that we have off to the right, honestly, I could have stole those straight from the things that you guys do. We want our airmen to be intelligent, we want them to be strong, and we want them to be ready for whatever the nation asks them to do. So just wanted to show you my team. Going into some of our mission, vision, and priorities, on the mission side of the house, it shouldn't surprise anybody. I take airmen and I take air power and I deliver them wherever they need to throughout the globe. On the vision side of the house, it's important for me to point this out to you guys, that we want people that are innovative, and that doesn't just mean a bunch of technology and a bunch of money. It means sometimes you got to think differently about the problem set that you're facing, and you guys are well aware of that when you're resource constrained. Also, we have to be ready for combat. That is a different mission, and then our focus on developing exceptionally ready airmen. And I put those two up there a year ago because our national security strategy says that, and it didn't change. Still the same thing. National defense strategy says that too. China and Russia, obviously the situation has changed quite a bit with China. And then finally, on the priority side of the house, this is also what you guys do with respect to developing exceptional leaders. We're developing them to be ready for combat and then accelerate and change. That's always looking at the future. So for me, I got 4 little people at home. You guys have heard me say this before. All of them are in this school district. 3 of them go to Discovery, 1 of them goes to Schrader. So as I think about how I develop my airmen, really I'm thinking about my little people in my house as well. So it's an important priority for me as well. Okay. So we're going to get into some of the partnerships we have in addition to you guys, just so you know that and you can set it into context. When you think about your school boards, plural, both of them, these are people that you're impacting by impacting their children. Cavalier Space Force Station now, it is a Space Force Station now. Civil Air Patrol, we have a significant relationship with them on the base. Grand Sky, you hear quite a bit about that. Customs and Border Protection, North Spark Defense Lab is a new one for us, and I'll talk a little bit more to that. But Brent Harlan is part of that team. He also happens to be part of your board overall. And then our future, the Space Development Agency actually has stood up, and they're starting their operations at the end of this year on Grand Forks Air Force Base. And then that E-11 Bacon mission is a manned conventional ISR mission. Like I said, that squadron will be in Georgia, but they answer back to Grand Forks Air Force Base, and they actually will fly up here every now and then on some of their training missions. So you are another one of those partners that we could add to this list, and I just wanted to highlight those to you as you think about what you do and the impact that you have overall right into the school itself. Okay, in terms of some of the opportunities and challenges that we face, and I had them put deliberately as a community, and I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to sit at the table. Cindy, thank you for that, because I consider myself part of that. In terms of opportunities, we put STEM. I could have put STEAM up there. Arts is important here as well. I got 2 kids that are very involved with the violin and the cello here, and they're looking at everything going on in the community. But from that standpoint, when you look at our mission set and the technical skills associated with it, clearly there's an opportunity to collaborate with us overall. Not just at Twining, but throughout the entire school board itself out into the community. The North Spark Defense Laboratory, you might have seen 2 articles recently. One of them we collaborated with a company called Airtonomy, and they do UAV, small UAV stuff that we're trying to work on streamlining those operations. The second one actually has to do with hydrogen energy overall, and that was the second CRADA, if you will. It's a cooperative research agreement. And if you want more information, Brent will give you more on both of those. But the reason I bring both of those up is when you think about where we're going in the future, what type of development do you need to do for our kids? And then what type of people are we going to be attracting from a military standpoint that will enter into your schools? Because it is changing. It is not the same demographic as what we've had before. So I think there's a great opportunity in that. On the challenges side of the house, the MIC3, which I might have asked a few people if they knew what that meant before we started this overall, that interstate agreement is across, obviously, the United States, but the agreement was put in place to help military families transition to a new location. We've had some challenges with this overall, specifically at Twining and at Central, which those are 2 primary schools for us, but I've gotten some feedback in some other schools as well. The document that was associated with it, I think it's about 7 or 8 pages that gives us the guidelines. On literally the title of the document, it is designed for administrators and school staff, but also for families. So we give that to our families before they even get here. So their expectation of the agreement is that it would be followed. Two things that we've had challenges associated with that is if a student gets assessed to, let's say, be a first grader in their particular state, and then they show up here, but they don't meet the first grade age, then that can become a problem because they're expecting to go into the first grade, but you want to keep them in kindergarten, or kindergarten is probably actually the most likely grade that you would see that in. In some other cases, we've had students, and specifically Chief Lizarraga, he's the one that's got the happy birthday up there, and he's got the fish, and he's fishing with his kids. One of his kids came in, she was assessed to be in advanced classes in two different states. 2 states ago, she was assessed for that. The next state she went to didn't honor it, North Dakota didn't honor it as well. So twice she's been assessed within a particular state, but she got here and she didn't get to actually go into that advanced class overall. That's one situation. There may be many where we've had the opportunity to do that, but there were a few other ones that I got feedback with, particularly for advanced classes, that students weren't able to do that as well. That interstate agreement, it was also designed not only for gifted or horizon or advanced classes, but also for special education as well. And so trying to make sure that they have the appropriate classes before they actually arrive to the state. It's one thing if you show up in the middle of summer, but it's a completely different thing if you show up in December or January. That can become pretty complex, especially if you've done the assessment in your state, but North Dakota wants to do their assessment. And we understand that, but it just can be challenging overall. So I'm asking this team to consider that, take that back to your board and also to your schools to see if you can get on parity, I would say, across the schools. The staff shortages, we know that's a challenge not only for Grand Forks, but across the state and nationally. We know that. We experienced that on the base as well. I'm not sure how we're going to get through this one, but I know we're going to get through it together, is what I would say. We do have plenty of families that, again, they PCS, they move into this, and so there's family members out there that might have some skills that you can use within your school district. So how do we actually tap into those personnel? There's 2 times a year where we primarily move. One's in the summer. The second one is in the winter months. Generally, we try to do ours in the summer here in North Dakota, but something for you to consider as a school board. Okay, so those are the big opportunities and challenges. Some of the things I wanted to highlight in terms of feedback that I got from these families and others, but there's overlap of stories. Chief Lizarraga coming in from New Mexico was where his last base was, and Idaho as well. Those are the 2 bases where his children were assessed for that. On a good news story, his high school son, he got here and he integrated into Central, and he actually had some challenges. And he was not doing very well, in fact, to the point where he wasn't quite sure he was going to make it through the school year. Thankfully, Central was willing to work with him and his family, and now he goes to the satellite school. I think it's in the mall. I think that's where they meet. And so his feedback was, one, it was great that the school was willing to work with him to get the right program for him overall. The second piece, and I can't overstate this, is that he talked about the counseling support that they got. So from a resiliency standpoint, when you think about what our kids go through from a military standpoint, showing up to a new place and trying to integrate, to have that counselor was huge for his family. So I wanted to highlight that one for his family. On the far right side, there's a couple there, Sergeant Illig with his son, who just entered 6th grade there at Twining, this is his 5th grade picture. And for their family, this has been phenomenal. His wife is a physical therapy assistant, so she works in the community as well. But his job is as a first sergeant, as a diamond. Do you guys know what that job is? What that person, you ever heard that term before? So basically, they have about 17 jobs. This particular sergeant takes care of about 150 people and really is responsible for their resiliency and plays many, many, many roles. So when you think about his 6th grade student and transitioning in, and he just got here in the last year, which for them was very easy, very smooth, you're playing a role because he doesn't have to worry about his student. He knows that when he goes to school, he's getting what he needs from that standpoint. So he really can focus on those 150 other people and their families to invest into them. So I just wanted to highlight that one from a good news standpoint. In the middle there, you guys might recognize the guy on the left. That's Colonel Fields. He just retired this past year. But he spent over 3 years on the installation, and his spouse actually worked at Twining as well. And I put him up there because sometimes you may forget that these people do transition out of the military. He just retired and he's stayed here for this next year. But his 3 sons that are in those pictures, his oldest, Austin, is now in the military, enlisted. His middle son is now going to Montana State University, and his third son will graduate this year from high school. So we often don't connect the dots of your impact and your influence. And chances are, with many of the people that wear a uniform, our kids probably are going to transition into the military. There is a correlation for sure and a propensity for that. So you are caring for national defense from that standpoint too, when you're helping those students transition to their next assignment, whatever that may be. So I appreciate your time and attention. I talked a little bit more about the mission from that standpoint than I would have historically, and I didn't give a lot, but I just wanted to show you that. I more so wanted to highlight these people and the stories, tell you there's some great opportunities in the STEM or STEAM aspect, and then just a few of the challenges. Overall, the feedback has been positive. We all have work to do, and I know that. I'm a partner with you guys from that standpoint going forward. And at this time, if there's any questions that you have for me, I'd be happy to answer those. Thank you.
Questions for Colonel Curry?
This might be the easiest briefing I give all week.
Just wanting to break down the barriers of the advanced classes. Is that at the middle level or the high school level? Are you aware of where I should start my questioning, I guess?
So I've heard the feedback at both middle school and high school. What I don't know, I'm hesitant to say this in this forum, is I really don't know what the policy is for advanced classes when that starts in North Dakota. And the reason I say that is my daughter just started. She's in 7th grade, but she's in advanced classes in Virginia. So I don't know if she ever was assessed or not until we started to ask the question, do you have advanced classes? Once we asked that question, they said, yeah, we do. And she transitions to Schrader, 1 year of normal, and then into advanced classes. So it's maybe a little bit of transparency of when does it start, because I'm not sure every school actually has the teachers to teach at that level, but I could be wrong. And if it's different for each schools, then I would just highlight that to the families.
Well, I think you have the right administrators in the room that can take that ball and run with it a little bit and get back to us. So, thank you. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Since you're being frank with us, and I hope you take this with all due respect, I just want to make sure that you've gotten, I am very cognizant of FERPA, and protection of families, so I hope that you got permission from the families to talk about their particular instances,
Yeah.
just full disclosure.
Yeah,
that
I'll go on record for that. That's how I got them. They gave me all that. And they gave me the pictures. Actually, they gave me a lot more information than that, but I didn't want to be here all night. But I appreciate that, and I am sensitive to that piece, especially because there's kiddos in the picture.
And I appreciate your bringing it up. I mean, it's great to hear all good stories, but I think this board in particular is interested in helping, serve all children.
Other questions or comments for Colonel Curry? From either board? Brent, do you want to make any comments? Brent and I were having a conversation beforehand, and we talked about nitrogen and some other things, and it sounded exciting, his work. I was just telling him I could never do his job. I don't have that kind of mindset, I don't think. So I don't know, Brent, if you want to say anything.
No, Colonel Curry's an awesome leader. It's an honor to serve alongside with them, honestly. So.
Thanks, Brad.
Are there any other questions for Colonel Curry? Okay. Well, thank you, sir. We greatly appreciate you coming out and connecting with the community and giving us your feedback.
Thank you. Just trying to advance you. There you go. You bet.
Thank you. Let's move on to item, get my glasses on, 5C, Annual Report for 21-22, electronic pages 5 through 23. Dr. Lewis.
All right, good evening, Board. Last year, you saw that we had made some changes to the annual report. This year, you'll see many of those changes reflected. I have a couple of things before we jump right into the slide deck here. Firstly, I want to say this looks different than my normal slides. Tracy Jentz did this formatting here, so I think it looks very professional and really well done, and a document that we will use in our marketing and other pieces. So I just wanted to honor that work. And secondly, as you know, with the presentation in it, it calls out a lot of data, and that data is desegregated by different student groups, and that looks at race and ethnicity, it looks at students served on an IEP, it looks at students served through English language services. Sometimes there's concern when we talk about the data desegregated by race and ethnicity that we're talking about critical race theory. And actually what we're doing is we are simply elevating what our data looks like on the aggregate, which you will see overall, here's where we are, but then we can really know how we are doing within each student group. So that's why it's so important, and you'll see as we go through these slides, you will see how different some of our student achievement data looks when it comes from the all student category, and then when you can see it drilled down by student group. So that's just a piece I wanted to bring forward as we begin this presentation. So we'll start here with our student enrollment information, and as you can see, last year we ended with 7,248 students, so this is last year's 21-22 data. And then you see the different student groups by race and ethnicity here broken out. So then you can see what does our district look like from this standpoint. And I know I mentioned this last year, and I'm going to mention it again. When I'm chatting with different stakeholders, I often hear people surprised when I say that we're about 33% students of color in our district. People get surprised by that. They think, oh, I didn't realize Grand Forks was as racially and ethnically diverse as it is. So that's a piece I wanted to point out for you on this slide. This is likely the last year that this slide will look like this for 1920, 2021, and 21-22. So you'll see our percentage of students qualifying for free or reduced meals is at 37.9%. This is a little bit misleading, but for the Department of Public Instruction, we are going by pre-COVID numbers for 2019-20. And so that 37.9% has been what has been carried through as our official percentage of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch in our district. Why does this matter? Before this school year, beginning in March of 2020, there was a action that stated that we didn't charge students for breakfast or lunch. So then what happened was, as our students started the school year 2021, families didn't fill out those free and reduced lunch forms because they didn't need to, right? Because those free and reduced lunches, it was free for everybody. So there wasn't that same motivation as there has been for the decades that came before that school year. Well, as you have heard us talk about before, free and reduced lunch rates drive many different supports that come into our district, including federal grants. So what happened is, as our free and reduced forms dropped, what happened to our rates? District-wide, the rates went down, and school-wide, it went down. And so the Department of Public Instruction said, we know these rates aren't really representative at all of what our free and reduced lunch rates are in our schools, so we're going to continue with the 1920 number. Some of you may have seen that our principals and school staff did just an amazing job of doing a push this fall and really this summer and last spring on getting those free and reduced lunch forms in, because now this is our last year that we will be going forward on this 37.9. So next year, unless something changes, you will see what I call the actual number for free and reduced lunch rates. And we are seeing much different numbers for some of our schools of free and reduced lunch rates than we were seeing last year, the year before that. I think that's really twofold. Number one, as I stated, we've done quite the push for families to understand, A, it's to have those subsidized lunch and breakfast for your child, but B, these are the supports and services that we benefit from, not only at your school level, but the district level. So that's why this slide, again, looks the same as it did last year with those rates. It's important to look at special education percentages. This is not a number that's probably new to you, as we've talked about this in some of our diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging presentations last year. So you'll see that uptick in special education over the last decade. So these are students who are qualifying to be served through an individualized education plan. Grand Forks Public Schools is not unique, that we are seeing across the nation this continued uptick over the last decade. What districts are also seeing is that uptick really since COVID. So lots of different dysregulation, learning loss, so forth. I'm really interested to see what our number is going to look like as we end this school year. And the reason that I shared that is, as you heard at the last meeting, just the work that Amy Barch and her team has been doing around the multi-tiered system of support, and you really heard Jess and Amy talk through that along with Amy Barch. And so with a school system that has a really high quality multi-tiered system of support, over time, as that is implemented and sustained with effectiveness, you will actually see the special education rates, for the most part, stay the same or drop a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how we see that in our district. A little disclaimer I will have, which is kind of how I started this, is that data that I cited about strong MTSS or strong response to intervention, pieces that districts have that in place, that was really work and research done pre-COVID. So it'll be interesting to see if that is something that stays, given the learning loss and all of the experiences that we've had as a result of the pandemic. The next slide, I wanted to go through, again, not new data. It just showcases for us the English learner rates that we're seeing. I will be honest, and I think I probably shared this last year, in most of the districts I've worked in prior, I've actually seen this number rising over time. But as you can see with Grand Forks, in the last 2 years, we've actually seen some declines in our number of students identified English limited proficiency, number of immigrant students, and number of refugee students. So these are have been actually decreasing. That can also change too. It could also increase in the next several years as well. I got an interesting question about when I had talked about 2 meetings ago, our last meeting, about our H-1B families that are coming, where would their students fall? So our teachers are either English as their first language or they're multiple English learners, English language speakers, natives, so they would not have students that are limited English, and they're not considered refugees, and our visa status is technically non-immigrant, so they would not fall in any of these categories. But I thought that was a really tremendous question that someone asked me about that, so I wanted to elevate that here. Now we'll move into the academic information, and here you'll see our STAR early literacy. This was data that Amy Barch and team presented in a very similar manner as well. So that was a really nice framing and really in-depth study of that. And then the annual report reflects that. So you'll see here, if you look just at that first line for STAR early literacy, in STAR, there's early literacy, and then there's just STAR reading. And early literacy, you'll see kindergarten, first grade, some second graders will transition to the higher test, and some third graders are in this. So it doesn't have a definitive grade level, but it would be not something that you would see fourth, fifth, sixth graders taking for the most part. So you can see here that looks like I have a little rounding issue there, but all students are at or above benchmark, 50%, and 50% are below. So as I talked about, when we look at that from the overall, we're seeing 50% and 50%. When we look at it for our students who are identified as Native, we're seeing 27% are at or above, and then we're seeing 72 are below. So again, this is where really looking at it by student groups gives us a more in-depth picture of what we're seeing. And then you'll see 2 or more races, 38% at or above, and 57% below. So you can see that based on different race and ethnicity. For students served on an IEP, you'll see that 19% of our students are at or above, and then the below is 72. And then students receiving EL support, 30% at or above, and 68. Again, this is something that we really want to keep looking at so that we can see how is every student doing and what are we seeing as far as our student groups. Here is that older grade levels of the STAR reading, and you'll see here the data is very similar as to what we just covered. One of the things that you heard Amy Barch talk about was really those CBMs, and with the changes that we have had with our teachers really pushing in and adopting science of reading, having that tight literacy block, we're already seeing such gains in just a matter of that fall administration for the STAR to 6 weeks later. So it'll be exciting to follow this, not only from each administration, but to really see that fall over fall as we continue to see how our curriculum work and the work that our teachers are doing on implementing that really plays out in this achievement data. STAR Math is not different based on, it's obviously for the grade levels, but there's not like early math and math. So here you will see, again, very similar data to as far as how it looks with all students, 66, and then below benchmark, 34. But then as you delve down and you look at that data again for our students identifying as Native American, 39 at or above, and 61 at below. So you can see how that is almost inverted of the all students. Then if you look at served on an IEP, there we have 30% at or above the benchmark and 70% below. And just a little bit higher there for our students receiving EL services at 39 and 61. This slide is for our NDSA. This is what's given in the spring to our students, and this goes into the overall, how did we do as a school district. So as you look here, you see that broken out by the same student groups that you saw. I'm very excited to share a celebration on this slide, and it's a very noted celebration. So if you look at students, level 3 and 4 is considered proficient or above, and 2 and 3 is partial or not yet proficient, is what you would see. Last year, for our NDSA ELA, students served on an IEP, we had 11% that were at or above. 24 is unprecedented. I am so proud of this data just to see those gains. And last year, we talked about what are changes that we have and will continue to make within special education. So really looking at ensuring that our students served on an IEP are receiving that on grade level curricular standard instruction. Seeing that some of those supports are actually pushed in and they're not pulled out of their classroom. And we're seeing that. We're seeing this in the data. And I was just so thrilled, as you can probably tell, to see, I mean, that is over a double increase. It's very, very, very notable. So I think that's just quite exciting news. Same thing for math, which I'm really excited about to share too. So within our students served on an IEP, 18%. Last year, we were at 9.5. So again, we saw double-digit gains. This is huge, not only to show that level of gains, but also to show it in both ELA and math. Again, the work that our teachers and staff are engaging in, the professional development, it's showing in our data. Our data tells us how we're doing with implementing and sustaining the work that we're doing. And this is something that I think is very much to be celebrated and acknowledged, these gains. As we move into our advanced placement courses, here you will see overall our percentage of students taking AP courses. This data, I want to pause for a moment. There's different ways to look at this data. The way that it's presented to you here is one student counts as one. You're like, well, that doesn't seem that big of a deal. Some students may take 3 advanced placement courses. They're still counted as one. So I wanted to make sure that you understood that. So you're seeing what our percent of eligible students taking AP there is for the last decade there of attendance. One of the pieces that is not in the annual report, but that we've done in other areas, other board education and presentations, is to look again, just how we looked at the data before, and to see how are we doing with respect to, very much in the beginning when I talked about that our district is almost 34% students of color. Does our AP enrollment mirror that? Are we seeing that that is what we're seeing in our classrooms, or are what I call underrepresented? Students of color are underrepresented. We'll bring that back at a later time. Last year we were underrepresented in both AP and honors courses when it came to our different student groups. And I know that we have been working on those pieces and that representation. Also, our work with AVID has been a big push around what that looks like too. So we're excited to bring that to you by student groups as well. Here's the dual credit courses that you'll see again over the last several schools here. It's illustrated for you. Again, we saw very similar underrepresentation of students of color in our dual credit courses. But again, you can see the enrollments are doing well this year, as they have in years past as well. Next, this I won't spend a lot of time on. We have talked about ACT scores and different board education. This slide really gives to you the composite scores, state average, and so forth. So you'll see GFPS is consistently coming in above state average here, and I know above large school districts in our state as well. One of the pieces to look at here is our work around, again, the student groups. So we're seeing all students are at 20.33. Our students that identify as Black are at 17.41. So something to definitely, we need to look at. And students served on an IEP, 13.67. Students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, 17.24. So just different pieces of why it's important to really desegregate and drill down in this data. Do you want to take this or do you want me to go forward with your, okay. All right. The next pieces here are customary information that we have provided through our HR team and our business team. So you'll see here the number of teachers that we have last year all the way back to 2016-17. A little bit of a drop you're seeing there. Other licensed staff, a little bit of an increase. And then you'll see that increase in the total. The next piece that we have here is not new information. Brandon and team have shared this in different formats, but this is our different revenue that we have from the local level, the state level, federal, and the total. And these are numbers from last school year, so June 30th, and then our appropriations that we have. And then our mill levies and comparing us to other similar districts. So with that, I will stop and field any questions or comments that you have.
Questions or comments for Dr. Lewis? Okay, I've got one just to start it. It seems like the two or more races, in my experience as a pediatrician, that's underrepresented here. 4.8% seems kind of low. And I know it can be confusing because I know my granddaughters who are Hispanic and Caucasian couldn't figure out how to fill out the form and stuff. So I wonder, do you think that 4.8 is underrepresented as a number? I'm not sure it makes a difference total, but I mean with that.
It was like you were in our 11:30 with Dr. Brenner and Ms. Galach. I actually, we talked about that. Last year it was over 10%, and it was our largest racial group that we had outside of students who identify as white. And I actually messaged Jake, who pulled this information for me, and I said, are we positive on this two or more races? And he said yes. Last year was our first year that we did the two or more races. And then this year, to see it drop that much, I was actually very surprised. But again, it does come down to what you illustrated there. It's what the parents put on their registration every year. So if they check, like our family, we check Black, white. So then they populate as two or more races. But if you just check white, it's populating just as white. With that being said, it does not populate then obviously in Black and white for my kids. It's just two or more races is where it populates. So the information here is as good as the parent or guardian that's entering it into our system. But I was just shocked, honestly, to see that much of a drop in that particular student group, just because it was our largest outside of white. So the other piece I failed to elevate, and Dr. Len, you prompted me without realizing it, is that sometimes you'll see in here, like the ACT, it doesn't have two or more races provided, and that's because College Board, if we pulled the NDSA information directly from ND Insights, as we were doing before, they don't push it out by two or more races, but with the addition of Panorama, our district is able to do that. So that's why you see some places we have access to it, desegged down by two or more races, and other places it doesn't include two or more races.
I just wonder if there's a better way to educate those that are filling out the forms. Again, I'm not sure it's going to make a difference in the end. I think you're still going to see people of color that are underperforming, but I just think it might be because I know in my practice a lot of people will say, well, I'm Native American, but then when I do go through the family history, well, no, they actually have some Black, Caucasian, Native, I mean, so I think people don't think necessarily, and I don't know if, Cynthia, if you have any thoughts on that as well with your work.
From my experience, I think people just aren't used to having the opportunity to identify it with two or more races. And so education is the key, right? Are you giving me the microphone to ask questions too? Yeah,
Go for it.
thanks. A question on the teacher demographics, page 23, or, yeah, 23 or around there, of the 22 of 57. What do you think accounts, Dr. Lewis, for the increase in other licensed staff? Do you think it's because we've increased maybe social workers, counselors? I don't know.
I think that, yes, and using, like, schools are getting, using with their ESSER dollars, increases in social work, so they may not buy what I call an entire FTE, but the district allocation might be 0.3 FTE, which is what they've received in the past, and then that's maybe shared with another school that's a 0.7. They're able to maybe round that up by a 0.2 to a 0.5. So then overall, or a 1.0, just depending on how they want to use their ESSER dollars. Also, schools can use Title I dollars to do those buy-ups as well. So I think it is those pieces. Also, we're seeing more interventionists that have been added in Title I dollars from our schools and a few in ESSER. So I think that's where, without pinpointing it by position, that's what I would think. Good question.
Thank you. And I've got another question. Okay. So we just, Monty Gockler and I and Brandon, were all at a legislative forum that the GFEA organized. And so one of the comments that I heard tonight was, we're not doing enough with the basics. Get back to the basics of reading and math. And when I look at the standardized test for the assessment of reading, which is what the STAR, I always have to Google those acronyms that you use, sorry. Is that something that can be compared to other districts, other schools? So the person that I was sitting with whispered to me as I was leaving, what about parochial schools? Like, what does reading level look like for their schools? And so I don't mean to put you on the spot,
No,
but if
that's
there's
okay.
a way to kind of, because we're going to have the forum on Thursday, if there's a way to slip that in somehow about that we are focused on math and reading, and we're looking at assessment too. So multiple comments there, I know, questions. Go ahead.
So I think while it's a different kind of assessment, I think probably the most readily available to really look at school systems within North Dakota is the NDSA. I think that's one way to look at that. I think the ACT will get you a little bit broader, because in Minnesota, ACT Day, for juniors, they also use ACT. School district that I came from, Montgomery County, they use SAT. So that wouldn't be like a comparison that I would say would be across the nation. Other areas we can certainly, districts that use STAR, that's all normed in there. So as districts are taking STAR, that's how they come up with their norming. As far as, if West Fargo and Bismarck and all of those districts that we often do, I'll call it fiscal comparisons to, if they publish out their STAR data like we do, then we could certainly look at it. But we don't have the same level, like Star Renaissance is the provider of that assessment. They don't give us the ability to see other school systems like we can with the North Dakota State Assessment. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think, I don't want to say easy, but the most readily available would be to look at other districts within NDSA. And of course, I think you can probably predict what's about to come out of my mouth too, is that it's important to look at overall and then to really look at by student groups as well within that NDSA. So I hope that answered your question. Graduation rates is another area to look at too. And those, as long as you're looking at the same graduation rates, like four-year graduation rates, you can compare that across states, across districts within North Dakota.
Other clarifying questions or comments from board members? Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing as Ms. Cynthia, but is it possible we could partner with another school that's maybe doing some of these things right and share data back and forth and essentially look at what the problem is and how we can fix it from the demographics? I bet there's other school systems out there that's similar to ours that are doing things, or maybe we could collaborate with them and learn from.
We actually, some of us in this room, have this monthly program that we're doing with other school systems that really works on the work around student data, specifically around the student groups. So that's an area where some of us are already doing that and really talking with other districts about what has been working in your district. Why are you seeing those gains? Those sorts of pieces. So I agree. That's something to continually work on and to do. And one of the pieces that I think is so important is you said about getting back to the basics, and I think that's pieces that our teachers, for all that is on their plate, they have just done an amazing job around the work of literacy. That has been really a challenge, but that's an example of how school systems, including ours, have really looked at how we teach literacy differently. And that's been because of overall student performance. It's also been because of the student groups. So the way that I taught reading as an elementary teacher is very different than the way we're teaching it now. And our data shows that. You saw that too from Amy Barch and team at the last meeting. So yes, that's very good practice.
Thank you.
Any other clarifying questions or comments? Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Appreciate it. Always informative. Let's move on to 5D, which is Impact Aid Funding Update, electronic pages 24 through 33. Brandon.
Thank you, President Lund, President Shepard, members of the boards. Get the privilege of talking through a little bit of one of the main funding sources for this unique board relationship that we have, that is Impact Aid. So I have a small presentation here. I'll just dim the lights quick. So I'll go through just a little bit of an explanation as to what Impact Aid is, what the intention is, highlighting just a couple of the changes, and what I've learned also during my attendance of the Fall NAFIS conference, and then just kind of a quick look at what Impact Aid has meant to our district financially over these previous few years. So firstly, just to define this, really at the highest level, the intention, as we heard earlier tonight, both at the forum and here, a good chunk of our dollars are represented by local taxation. Rounding, it's 61% comes to the district from the state of North Dakota, 24% locally, and then the balance of that is 15% federally. So a quarter of our funding does come from those local sources, and those are coming off of property taxes. When we have the existence of a military installation in our community, there are no property taxes paid. There are no property taxes paid both for residents, the businesses that exist, or the sales tax that would occur in those. And so Impact Aid is an effort to kind of correct that entire equation for that local school district. And coincidentally here, I mean, it's actually the second oldest elementary, secondary federal education program on the books, administered by the Department of Education. So it's steeped in history. 1950, the original legislation was passed to offset this, understanding the importance of this. The impact aid also applies beyond the military installation into native lands as well, but just staying focused on what's impacting our local area of military impacted. Later, it came some of the other amendments that you'd be a little bit more familiar with, perhaps by title, the Title I, different, through the vehicle of ESEA was put into law. And so this just kind of goes to note that this was really leading the way early on with federal education programs and the financing that follows. And it articulates just a few other changes that later really integrated impact aid into that ESEA. So it's a part of that broader federal funding mechanism, ESEA, that title does come to us through as well. But one big difference, if we've heard my colleagues talk about title funding, it's primarily meant to supplement, not supplant. Well, this is exactly backwards. With impact aid, it's meant to supplant, as in to replace those taxes. So these dollars come into the general fund of the district, and they can be used for really anything that we would, just as if they came in as property taxes. So interesting relationship with the title. Put it in context quickly, there's a pie chart on this slide here for you, just to kind of give you a look at what the 22 presidential budget looked like. 3.7% is really what's set aside for education. So starting with the biggest picture here, that's what's focused for education. And then we get into the actual impact aid. It's a whole lot of communities who are impacted by military installations, native lands, federal property ownership, and there's a lot that competes for these dollars. So as much as they work to offset that local property tax, that's a quarter of our budget, it is not entirely made whole throughout this process. And that's the picture I'm painting here. Before we get to the last line of that story, it's worth noting the federal property, that there are 200 school districts across the nation that are impacted. That's where we would fall. So it's a unique piece of legislation that's very important, steeped in history, but not everybody's impacted by it. So it does take an effort with our congressional delegation and elected representatives in Washington to remind them of the importance of this funding for Grand Forks and Minot and other communities just like us. And so to this point, this is slides prepared by NAFIS to show that really what the basic payments, there's a couple of different sections of the payment mechanism, but the graph on the left is meant to articulate really where this actual payment's coming in nowadays. It's about $1 billion short of where it ought to be if we were to aim to completely make whole those property tax revenues that were lost locally. And then it does break down a little bit further. The entire equation is based off of the number of military-connected children. In the beginning, it was really just those children who are living on the installation, and have since broadened that explanation or the definition to include those who are military-connected in a number of different ways. Even if Colonel Curry's students are not actually living on the installation, but they're going to school downtown, this all still works its way into our entire formula. So specifically, a couple of slides provided from that NAFIS conference, and you can see here with a little bit more numerical values, just noting the rows here are just a couple of different components of the military impact aid. And then the column headers are bringing us from left to right, previous years to modern year. And you'll notice the top two lines, we're seeing a modest increase into the impact aid. These are in millions of dollars, so that's $74 million, and that's $1.3 billion. We see a modest increase over the years, but disability payments, construction payments, facility payments have been frozen for these 5 years. And so it's if you're familiar, or I'll remind you throughout the year within the Grand Forks Air Force Base School District's budget, there's really two items we talk about as a general operational budget, and then there's also the construction dollars. And so when we're considering projects like bringing the air quality up to standard or air conditioning at Twining, we're dealing with an interesting dynamic here where we've been frozen for some years and the cost of these things have been increasing. So it's something to keep in mind. And so one of the big updates that I received during that conference is is they really get everybody aligned with some of the talking points, and we're all invited to go up to the Hill and talk with our congressional leaders, and we're all on the same message here. And this is one of the more recent correspondences that had gone out through an email list, just to kind of give the update. You can see that the House Appropriations had approved the FY23 bill to include the $57 million ask, which is really what the NAFIS organization was prioritizing. And that Senate Appropriations had come in just a little bit below that, but all told, the feeling was positive, but still in the context of this 5-year slight increase for only those top 2 lines and not all portions of impact aid. And so what this means to our districts here is, you can see this chart I put together. I'll walk it through it. The far left column, of course, is the years, with the top being 2013, 14, all the way up to modern day. You'll see that the arrangement in the second column changed from $2.5 million tuition payment to $3 million tuition payment. This is the actual payment from Grand Forks Air Force Base District 140 to Grand Forks Public Schools District 1 as a cost or a pay for the instructional services that are provided out there. That's not the actual impact aid. You'll find that number in the third column here. And this is the number that's really our basic, when you talk about what's being displaced from local property tax generation, the formula will spit out this number. You'll notice the asterisks. There is separate lines that are related to students under the disability part of the formula. So there's a little bit additional, and that number varies anywhere from $99,000 a year to $147,000. So that's worth noting. Now, to help understand those numbers, there's just 4 columns as we move all the way to the right of the table, breaking it down per pupil. So you can see that with that impact aid, simply divided by the number of children that are out at Twining, you can get to this average payment per student. But the state of North Dakota had been reducing this payment by 75%, treating it as a tuition payment, despite the intention of impact aid at the federal level. And so previous business manager Scott Berge and the entire team here had gone to legislative session last time and lobbied for a change. So you'll notice in the column with the percentages, at the very bottom you'll see 63%. This, FY22 marked the first year of a progression over 6 to make that right. As in, at the completion of those 6 years and 5 more, we will be back to be able to hold on to 100% of that. Ultimately, what that has meant is that per pupil payment has been a little bit less than what was really fully intended by the impact aid. And to put it in context, for the total payment, that's considered the revenue side for a student in FY21-22 is $3,200, whereas the average cost to educate a student is just over $13,000. And so it's a tough equation, but thanks to our partnership here together, we've been able to overcome some of those things, and we'll continue to be vocal about making changes for the benefit of both of the school districts and the unique relationship that we have. I am a student of Impact Aid too, so I'll continue to learn as I get to go out to the conference, but I'd be happy to stand for any questions on this or any of the previous slides.
Any clarifying questions or comments from board members? Seeing none, I guess we will move on. Thank you, Brandon. We'll hear from you in a little bit anyway. So let's move on to item 5E, which is curriculum review, and it's on electronic pages 34 through 36 in the District 1 packet. Catherine.
Thank you, Dr. Lund. As you can see on page 34, there's a memo from me about the curriculum review process. It is completed at this point. The Secondary Curriculum Review Committee reviewed 3 course proposals for the 2023-2024 school year and also approved modifying the number of health and physical education credits required for graduation from the current status of 2.0 credits to 1.5 credits. This alteration better aligns with the number of health and physical education credits required from all other North Dakota schools of which we are aware, and will allow students more choice around passion and interest area electives. The change will begin with next year's freshman class and does not affect the overall number of credits required for graduation. You can see the wonderful members of the Curriculum Review Committee listed there. It includes teachers and administrators and persons from out here at MSCC. And you can also see the criteria that we use to guide our discussion on the course proposals. If you switch to page 35 in your packet, you can see the courses themselves. There were 2 recommended for deletion. Those would be Foundations of Fitness and Lifetime Fitness and Wellness. And again, both of these are in alignment with the recommendation to reduce the number of overall FIED and health credits required for graduation. The Foundations of Fitness course, the preference there is to allow students more choice in their PE education courses instead of dictating. That has been a required class to date. For Lifetime Fitness and Wellness deletion, the preference is to make sure that if we're reducing the number of credits, that we're actually increasing movement in those classes. And so to not have it be an information-based course, which Lifetime Fitness and Wellness was, but to make sure it's a movement-based course. You will see that there's a suggestion to add AP Physics 1, which includes A and B courses, 2 semester-based courses, with a contingency. In a nutshell, the rationale for that is that currently the advanced science students don't have a logically progressive track towards graduation. So for example, they can take enriched chemistry followed by AP biology, and then they're left with a standards physics course. And those students have been asking over the course of time to continue on that enriched class, especially those that are interested in pursuing the sciences post-secondary. When you compare Grand Forks with other Class A schools in North Dakota, most offer AP Physics 1 as a course offering, so this would put us in alignment there as well. You can see that there are a couple of prerequisites that really have to do with having geometry and or Algebra 2 mathematics courses, because it's a math-heavy science class. And you can also see where the credits will be offered per semester to juniors and seniors. There's always a caveat on the juniors and seniors. We do have some students who progress through their schooling more quickly, so they are not the age of a junior or senior, maybe they're a sophomore level student, and we also take into considerations those students if it's the right scope and sequence for them to complete advanced coursework. There's a one contingency that is required here. The committee felt very strongly that we wanted to make sure that there was access from each campus to this coursework, and there were 3 options which we asked the science departments across the schools to explore. That could be an integrated, remoting in with building-based support, a standalone section, or by scheduling it at a time when students can easily travel between campuses. The last option is quite honestly our least preferred, because sometimes transportation can be a barrier, and we want to make sure that students do have access to higher level classes of interest. And so the approval of the Curriculum Review Committee's recommendations will be brought forth for action at the next school board meeting. Tonight is just an information only and a time for me to field questions from you if you have any at this time.
Clarifying questions or comments from any of the board members? Go ahead, Cynthia.
I just want to make sure I heard you correctly, Catherine. So I get the lifetime fitness and wellness, because you state there that it's more movement, or to allow for more movement. So what was the Foundations of Fitness? Was that not a movement course, or was it a movement course?
Great question. It is a movement-based course. It is a currently required freshman level course. The FIED department felt that there was a lot of redundancy between that 9th grade class and what students experience in grades 7 and 8 physical education. And so they'd rather that students have more choice than having a kind of a generic overview class of Foundations of Fitness. So if a student wanted to be more in competitive sports and games, they could go that route. If they wanted to go more in Breathe and Stretch, which is more of a yoga-based lifetime activity course, they could go that route, etc. You're welcome.
Other clarifying questions or comments from board members? Go ahead, Michelle.
So coming from other districts in different states, we have seen, I think we can all say being military here, we have seen obviously different requirements for graduation. One that I was used to in our previous state was that physical education was not a mandated class if you did a sport. Is that something that our district has ever considered or looked into or discussed as to if a student is doing a full-time sport, and I'll give my son as an example. He is very heavily interested into the arts. and fulfills his time with playing in the orchestra and band, as well as he wants to be in ROTC and all these other extracurricular activities. He is also part of the wrestling team, where his physical education by no means is not being met. So for students like him in that example, has it ever been considered to where those sports can give them the opportunity to fulfill their physical education requirement?
We have discussed that. Have we taken action on that to date? No. We've hit some barriers and differences of an opinion around that, quite honestly. But the mere fact that we're recommending to lower the number of required credits is a step in that direction as well. We really talk a lot about student wellness and balance, and how we want to promote lifetimes of wellness and balance for all of our students. So therein lies the big debate on whether or not all sports equal the same degree of wellness and balance comparatively, the number of hours that they commit to it, et cetera, et cetera. So we haven't quite tackled, no pun intended, that full conversation yet.
And I think in North Dakota, that used to be a lot more popular. I mean, granted, I went to school a long, long time ago, but I never took Phi Ed because I was always in sports. I think that was actually a detriment after I got done and got out and stuff. So but I think it's always something we should revisit periodically. Other clarifying questions? Go ahead, Monty.
I just would say thank you for looking at adding an AP Physics course, because I have two children who were very into science, and you're right, there was no progression once they took AP Bio, then they took, I don't know, whatever courses they took, but there was no AP Physics, so they could take physics, but then really their senior year, there was nothing unless we arranged to try to get them to UND to take something or whatever. So I appreciate I appreciate those teachers who are suggesting that, because for those students who are in that area, I think they were missing that.
Thank you. And I should have given props to Joseph Ostergarden, who is the one who wrote the proposal and brought it forth to the committee. He was unable to be here tonight, but he deserves the credit for leading that charge.
Any other clarifying questions or comments from board members? Go ahead, Joe, sorry.
Okay, this, just a question and inquiry. Are any of the physical education classes teaching things like canoeing, kayaking, orienteering, mountain biking, climbing, sort of the alternative athletic or physical education things?
We do not have the focus. We do have cycling integrated into some of our classes, but those other activities we do not. We do, the closest we get, and this has nothing to do with physical education, is that our field biology course does take kids on explorations of that sort to look at biological in its natural, or the biology in its natural habitat, but we do not have that at this time. Great suggestion, however. I can probably hear some Phi Ed teachers wringing their hands right now at the possibility of that.
Go ahead, Michelle.
And just, I know I've kind of said this before, but just to be that squeaky wheel, something I urge the districts to consider is I'm so happy that we are offering all these different AP and dual credit courses and whatnot, but just to always keep in mind how we can improve the availability to all students in the districts to make sure that courses that are being offered at Red River, while not at Central or vice versa, that we look into ways that we can improve the availability to those students. A lot of students don't have the transportation, so if they're bused to Central or bused to Red River, to be able to get to the other school. So just something that I urge us to all keep in mind is how we can improve that in the future.
Thank you. Any final thoughts? If not, thank you. Let's move on to back to District 140, Michelle.
This will be item 5E on the baseboard packet and is our monthly enrollment report. You can find that on page 36 of the baseboard packet, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Lewis.
Thank you so much. So there was no change in the number of students from September to our October enrollment at Twining Elementary. So that was strong at 224 in K through 5. And then we did see a decrease of 2 students from September to the October count of from 86 to 84. We are overall up 5 students from last October, and our K-8 enrollment at Twining is 308. Currently, Central has 55 Air Force Base students, Red River doesn't have any, and Community has 1.
Are there any clarifying questions for Dr. Lewis?
The 55 students, are those students that live on the base, or are those students that live on the base or in town? Or can we identify those ones that are in town?
Dr. Brenner, did you want to take it? I was going to say it's a combination of both.
Well, and just a reminder, we have 145 students across our city schools who are military-dependent kids who don't live on the base.
Any other questions? Perfect, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, let's move on to item 6A, which is item 6, the superintendent's recommendations for action. 6A is the consent agenda on electronic pages 37 through 39. Can I get a motion and a second for the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Dr. Shab. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Manley. Any some consent agenda? Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Let's move on to 6B, which is general fund financial statement on electronic pages 40 through 49. Brandon.
Thank you, Dr. Lunn. So this is our monthly update here. I just wanted to quickly highlight that this is through the period of July 1 through October 31, and with total revenues at almost 28 million and expenditures at almost 27 million, our resulting revenues over expenditures are just over $1 million. To take you through the 2 different reports and a couple of graphics associated here, I'll highlight just a couple of different things. As a reminder, because we're a combined board session, this is the general ledger for District 1. Of course, this would be inclusive of those instructors and the payroll that's associated with instructing out at Twining as well. A couple of things worth noting here on the revenue of the first report, that's page 41 of your packet, is that the local sources are sitting at about 2.3% of what is budgeted, and that's quite normal. You'll see over the year-over-year comparison, we'll begin to see those come in January as taxes are paid locally. Our state sources, though, are 40%, and they're gonna clip along about 20% increase each month until just into the spring here. And late in the game is when we really start to, well, our federal sources can start to come in. A lot of those are often reimbursable programs as we make claims against the dollars we've spent out of our general fund. And so that is incurring. You might notice when we compare over year, we're a little bit lagged this year on those federal dollars being reimbursed back in. So I'll point that out when we get to the graphic. Just paging through here to page 44, which is the top of the second report. This is that year-over-year comparison. So the first column of the 22-23 actuals, that's this year, with last year's actuals at the same time, gives us a better sense of just how we're coming along. Again, you'll see local sources on the revenue is right where we'd expect to be, state sources right where we'd expect to be, and you can see the federal. By this time last year, we had actually called in just over $1 million of reimbursement. Those dollars are there, and we'll be doing that. We're just time delayed a little bit this year. A couple of comments that correspond with later rows in this document I just wanted to point out in the comment box on that first page. There's variability in these, and I mentioned the federal variability already, and a couple of specific items here too. Just wanted to make sure that if you had questions, if you're going down, you might see a couple of those differences, and I try to put those in your packet to get ahead of any questions you might have, but happy to clarify those a little bit more. I will scroll down just to the graphic pages. There are 3 pages 47 through 49. That's corresponding with general fund revenues, a snapshot in time over the previous 3 years, including this current fiscal year, and then expenses and then balances. You'll notice the revenues are tracking so-so. The expenditures right about what we'd expect, but when you really get to the general fund balance, that's where you can see the disparity in where our green bar, the far right bar, is a little bit lower than previous years. That is really just those federal dollars. I mean, if you added $1 million into that mix, that'll help bring that back up. And so I would just let you know my expectation. These bars will all normalize here in the next couple of months as we begin to see those revenues come in. Happy to stand for any questions here in clarifying. Otherwise, would ask for consideration to recommend approval for the general fund financial statement as it's been presented.
Any board member clarifying questions or comments? Go ahead, Cynthia.
I don't know if this is, I'm on page 46 of 57 under travel. So it's looking higher than it was last year. So do you have any explanation for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I looked into that too. And last summer, and some of this would have fallen into the previous fiscal year and some of this into the current fiscal year, we did a lot of travel around the AVID, as my colleagues would better explain. But with that initiative, we've set up 3 initial sites, and it's taken a lot of travel around that initiative. Those are paid by ESSER dollars, and we would not expect that kind of level of travel to continue in future years. But you'll see that some of that stuff is on the books for this fiscal year, so we got a jump start on our travel budget.
Other clarifying questions? Go ahead, Cynthia.
This is, so busing, maybe this isn't a budget question, though. I was curious about learning that one of the buses wasn't able to go for a swim meet because they didn't have staffing for it. So I don't think that that's a budget question. And this happened a little while ago. I just thought of it.
Sure, I can offer some insight. This year's budget and the joint powers agreement, a future agenda item would help too, is that busing has been the tightrope walking that we anticipated coming into this year, and they've been short on drivers. So any day of the week and any weekend travel has always been a little bit tricky. We've been in close partnership with both Dietrich and the city and working to overcome those. So fortunately, the calls, when they do come in, we've found solutions. But I know there have been some times where there are challenges right down to the last minute of finding drivers.
Any further clarifying questions? If not, can I get a motion and a second?
So moved.
Motion to accept by Cynthia, second by Monty. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Let's move on to item 6C, which is joint powers agreement between all the variant entities regarding transportation services, electronic pages 50 through 57. Brandon.
Thank you, Dr. Lund. Members of the board, what you have in front of you is a joint powers agreement between those 3 unique entities, the Grand Forks Public Schools, the City of Grand Forks, and Dietrich Busing Services. You'll also notice that Cities Areas Transit is mentioned throughout that. That's an entity of the City of Grand Forks. That's the public busing. The history in this is prior to last year, there was short notice of a challenge approaching the school district, and that Dietrich was having a hard time finding those bus drivers. Plenty of buses, not enough drivers. And previous administration, previous business manager did what we could to get kids to school. And through that, a lot of really great solutions, a lot of innovative things, a lot of lessons learned. And so this document was imagined as soon as that point of coming together and clarifying roles and relationships. Last year, the school district even compensated CAT, or Cities Area Transit drivers, directly to make sure that we had enough drivers. We had students at times on those public transportation routes. This year, we were able to get ahead of those things where that is not the case in either situation, and this document clarifies that. We wanted to get all kids on yellow school buses, flashing lights with cross arms, and all the safety gear you would expect. We've done that. We wanted to make sure that any relationship to get those drivers into those yellow buses who are city's area transit employees, but will be driving on behalf of Dietrich and the routes that we have in the school district. We wanted to make sure we weren't paying them directly. That relationship stayed between Dietrich and CAT. That's been accomplished as well. So this is the legal work behind that to clarify that. The meetings and all the work up until this point had all taken place. This is the final touches on that agreement here. So this is the contract in front of you to formalize that.
Clarifying questions or comments for Brandon on the contract? I just had one, Brandon. It talks about an Exhibit A with the individuals who are authorized to drive the buses, and that didn't bother me. What bothered me was that unless there's a change, it'll be made by the school board. So are we going to have to be bringing new names and dropping names off to a school board meetings for that? Is that the way I read that?
It's a good question, Dr. Lund. That has not been called to our attention. I can assure you our legal has gone through this and assured us of how tight this is here. I couldn't imagine that to be the case with the way bus drivers on the roster have been coming. But this, as a reminder, is between the city's area transit drivers and Dietrich. So as much as Dietrich has their full roster of drivers, this identifies the 2 to 3 city's area transit drivers that would be driving in yellow school buses.
Yeah, the only thing that concerned me, it says, unless a change is authorized by the school board of the district. So that's why I was wondering, are they going to be, those names may have to be floating to our meetings for approval.
I will be happy to clarify that point.
That's fine. Other clarifying questions or comments? If not, the recommendation is to approve the agreement as outlined.
Dr. Lund, what page were you on, please?
Electronic page 53, 3 of 7. It's under individuals to operate buses, number 10. And
Is there an Exhibit A?
there is an Exhibit A, it's just not attached.
That's-
I'm assuming there's an Exhibit A, it's just
Yeah.
not part of this. I mean, I'm not so concerned about the Exhibit A because of the qualifications of what they have to go through to get on that list. I mean, it's well outlined what they have to go through to be on that list, so I don't have any concerns about that. Further clarifying questions or comments?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Second by Jeff. Any final questions? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Let's move on to 7A, announcements. I just had one. We're having a legislative forum. It's come up a couple times on Thursday, December 1st. If you haven't called Cindy and said you're going to attend, you've missed your RSVP time, but I think she'll still accept you to come to that for those of you that haven't. The dinner is at 5:30. The forum is from 6 to 7:30. And for those of you that haven't gone to these, they're very informative. The school district, the city, the county, park district, and airport authority will give presentations to our legislators from our area. There's no concerns about quorum. It's not like only 4 of us can show up. We can all 9 show up for any of you who are concerned about a quorum at all. So if you are hoping to attend or planning to attend, please let Cindy know as soon as possible, like maybe before the night's out. Dr. Brenner, did you have any announcements?
Stole my thunder, but I believe Dr.
Oh, I'm sorry. We didn't get a chance to pre-talk, so.
I believe Dr. Lewis does.
Dr. Lewis.
Thank you so much. I have a couple of announcements. Our pre-qualified pool, which I shared with you at our last meeting as part of our H-1B update, we're now calling it pre-qualified pool number 1, will occur on December 1st because it's so funny. The postings are linked to my email. So every time someone applies, I get this lovely note that says so-and-so applied into your pool. All Thanksgiving, the Friday after, my email was going crazy. And as a result, we actually closed the pools today, and I'll talk about that in a second. We have 95 candidates that applied solely into the elementary teacher posting. That's not including kindergarten, special education. I was like, this is fantastic. Last year, just for perspective, we had 18. Then of those candidates, 16, which is a little bit even more today, 16 are domestic candidates and 79 are international. We did a really concerted effort, Tracy and Griffin, with pushing out this to local universities, to making sure that we advertised it internally and externally to get our domestic candidates. We did zero advertising to international. So that just tells you that our name is out there as an H-1B provider, so our sponsor. So the nice thing is that we're going to have to hold multiple of these pre-qualified pools. As I shared last time, domestics will always be brought first to the hiring table. That's the law. And of course, we'll follow that. And then with international, which this enables us, is to get our international candidates for any positions that we aren't able to fill with domestics. We'll get them here on time for the start of the school next year, which is wonderful. So I am just thrilled by that. I have another exciting update. So our spousal team that I had shared with you that we were having a little bit of hiccups, our female teacher that is from Ghana, she was approved last week, so we're super excited, and the husband from Zimbabwe had been approved already, and they are arriving on December 10th, which is really exciting. So they'll be starting December 12th, and then of course they bring their 1-year-old and their 5-year-old. Tuesday late, we had our third international candidate arrive. She's teaching in self-contained autism at Century. Today was her first official day there, and we had her husband and 4 children that we welcomed, which was so exciting. Then a further development is that we have made it through every step in our Filipino process, which is markedly a big deal. When I was interviewed by them months ago, they had told me that we were the first school system in the nation that they are aware of to do the H-1B and approved. So what this means is now we're an accredited employer. We're in what's called a 3-day waiting period, and then our talent is able to book flights as soon as they do their pre-orientation, which is later this week with the government. Then they're cleared. So we will definitely be getting our talent between December 5th and the 19th. So that's 7 talent that are coming that were already in our previously authorized with the Philippine government. But now we're fast-tracked. So we have 3 more hires on top of those 7 from the Philippine government. We don't have to go through all those layers. So lots of really exciting updates that I wanted to share with all of you.
Merry Christmas, Dr. Lewis. Catherine, do you have any announcements? Brandon, do you have any announcements? Brady, do you have any announcements from GFA? Colonel Curry, do you have any announcements you want to add to the group? Good. Thank you for being here. School board norms, how did we do, Dr. Shab?
I thought we did really well, except that I feel like I talked a lot, so maybe I'm judging us wrong. But Jeff gave us a high standard last time, 105 out of 100. I would say we are respectful at 100.
Only IT people can make up numbers like that. So we are adjourned. Thank you all.